name is Jess Gregg, and I am here at UCLA in Southern California with my colleague Rachel Kennison, who's co-facilitating with us today. So we're going to do introductions in a minute, but I wanted to start today by, I guess we'll start with that actually. So we'll start with our introductions here. So I work at UCLA doing some of our workshops and trainings and consultations with faculty about course design and support an initiative through the National Science Foundation's Includes project, which is part of the program that is sponsoring today's workshop, and is really the goal of the Aspire award that we have through the NSF Includes project is really aimed at helping to strengthen and diversify the national faculty to be better prepared to teach students from inclusive backgrounds, very diverse backgrounds at both our community colleges and our four-year institutions. So we're very happy today to be have our panelists sharing everybody a little bit more information specifically about what it's like to teach at a community college, and today specifically how to actually get a job teaching at a community college. So that's a tiny bit about me. Rachel, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Rachel Kennison. I work with Jess in our Center for Teaching and Learning at UCLA. I'm also the program coordinator for the CIRTL training courses for grad students and postdocs at UCLA. I teach a course on career exploration, both for undergrads and for grad students and postdocs. And I have some experience teaching. I still teach at Santa Monica College, a career counseling course there, so I have some experience in community colleges. And I am just hearing a lot of interest in how to get into teaching at community colleges from the grad students and postdocs. So I'm also excited to learn from this panel.
Great. And I got an email from Kristen Bird, our first panelist here, who is trying to get on right now. She's having a little bit of trouble, but she thinks she'll be on in a moment. So we'll have her introduce herself when she's able to connect here. Timothy, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
This is Timothy Huntia. I work at Cerritos College and run the honors program. I've been working with human resources as the rep on hiring committees since 1999. And if you get hired at Cerritos, you're going to be hired and evaluated by policies that I've worked on. So looking forward to answering your questions.
Great, and I forgot to put in the slide that Cerritos College is here in Southern California. Carrie, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, I'm Carrie Henson. I'm Associate Dean of Science, Engineering, Mathematics, and Social Sciences at Des Moines Area Community College. And I'm very excited to be part of this panel and to share with you all the wonderful things that are going on in our many community colleges across the nation. We're excited. If you are interested in a scholarship in teaching and learning, a community college is a very good place for you to be.
Great, thank you so much. Just a little bit of context about this series here. And Carrie, maybe can you push your talk button again? I think we're just getting a little feedback there. So if you could just mute when you're not speaking, that would be great. About this series, so this is one workshop that's part of 3. The first one we already had, which was an introduction to getting hired at the community college. An introduction to teaching at community colleges. Today's is about getting hired specifically. And then we also had one on April 11th about understanding diversity and inclusive teaching in the community college setting. That one will also be panel style as well. I wanted to just also share some other events that are happening in April. There's an all-network teaching as research presentation on April 17th. And then also related to this Aspire initiative that I mentioned, there's another workshop called Faculty Advising in a Community College Setting, What You Need to Know and How to Do It Well. So that if you're interested in a career at community colleges, that would also be a great one to attend. So hopefully you'll put those on your calendar and register for those events as well. Okay, so I just wanted to get a sense of the room here. We have 86 people I'm seeing, which is wonderful. So we just wanted to do a quick poll and see how many of you were also at the first one. So you can see there's a little icon there about how to, a little image about how to hit that polling icon, the little check mark, and then to, here it says yes or no. So a little check or a little X. I'll give you 1 minute to do that. Like about half the people have voted. So it's that little check mark that's under your name. There's 4 little icons, and so way on the right, it's a little drop down, and it says yes or no. Okay, so I think most people have voted. Shannon, can you show the results there? Thank you. So most of you did not attend our first one, and about 25% of you did. And about 25% of you didn't vote, so we don't know. A bunch of you did, some of you haven't. That's great. We welcome you, and we'll be learning more about this career today as well. And then the second question here is, are you planning to apply to a job at a community college or currently applying? So we're just curious how many of you are really certain versus you aren't really thinking about this, but you just wanted to learn more, or if you're kind of on the fence there. So go ahead and vote one more time. Okay, you can go ahead and show the results. It looks like most people are saying, a lot of people are yes, definitely, and some are not sure. So really great to have you joining today either way, so that we can either confirm this decision for you or give you lots more information to help you make the decision. Okay, so I see that Kristen, looks like you were able to join. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, sorry. As soon as I logged in, my computer crashed, and then it took forever to log back in. My name is Kristen Bird. I teach at Tarrant County College in Fort Worth, Texas, and I've been teaching here about 10 years. And I just recently, in the last 2 years, became department chair, so have now served on some hiring committees and have hired a few faculty, so both adjunct and full-time. So I think maybe I can offer some valuable information. Plus, I applied myself.
Great, we're so happy to have you. Thank you for taking the time. Okay, so I just wanted to let everybody know, I know in our first session, for those of you who were there, we had a lot to get through and we didn't quite get through everything, and wanted to make sure that we have time at the end for today for questions. So I just wanted to give you an overview of the topics that we're going to be covering so you can be informed that your question hopefully is going to get answered. So we have, we're going to talk a little bit about adjunct versus direct to full-time options, if you're thinking about if you need to adjunct first or if you just want to adjunct versus trying to get a full-time job off the bat. We're going to go through really the nuts and bolts of the application process, the interview process, if there's a teaching demo involved, what that looks like. So really exactly what the process would be like and what the hiring panels are looking for in your materials and in your teaching demo and interviews. And then any advice for what you can be doing now so that you will be a competitive candidate when you are applying if you're not applying already. So that's the things that we're planning on covering initially. So in the chat, as we're going through this, please do feel free to ask questions. I request that the questions that you're asking are related to the question that the panelist is addressing at that time. So if we're talking about applications, that your question is about the application. If you have other questions, I'll ask that you just write them down, and we'll make sure that we do have time at the end to come back to questions that have not yet been answered. We just want to try to avoid having a separate conversation happening in the chat, as that can be a little bit distracting for both our panelists, but also for the participants as well who are trying to follow both things happening. So let's just try to keep our questions in line with what the topic is at that time. And yeah, with that, I think we can go ahead and get started. So I'm going to ask Rachel to go ahead and ask our first question.
Yeah, so our first question is for Carrie. We know there can be this sort of common misconception that if you get an adjunct position, that guarantees you a full-time position. And so we're wondering if you could give us some advice about starting as an adjunct versus trying to get a full-time position. And have most of your hires also been adjuncts? And I think there were some questions in the chat also about applications. Do you tailor them differently if you are applying for an adjunct versus a full-time position?
Sure, I'm happy to answer that question. The majority of full-time faculty that we have hired at our community college the last 7 to 10 years have had some sort of teaching experience. So that might be full-time at another institution and or adjunct instruction. Whenever we post a position, we will have a large proportion of our current adjunct faculty base that will generally apply for those full-time positions, and that's wonderful. Certainly they would have a leg up because we are familiar with their teaching style. We know that they have been very student-centered, great to work with, flexible over time. So certainly that getting your foot in the door is very important. A very important consideration for any teaching position at a community college is some sort of teaching experience. In more high demand, difficult technical fields, it is not unusual for us to hire someone who has only had undergraduate teaching experience or graduate teaching assistant experience along with professional field experience, which can be very valuable in some of our more technical fields and areas of expertise. But search committees will strongly be looking for teaching experience. So if you're hoping for a full-time position and haven't been able to get one, my recommendation to you would be if you have a particular area of the country or institution you desire a full-time position, is definitely to apply for an adjunct position while waiting for full-time employment.
And is there any difference, you would say, in applications for an adjunct versus a full-time?
In terms of the actual employment application, generally they are very similar. There may be additional essay questions required of a full-time applicant. In addition, the adjunct positions will require a short teaching demonstration that might be with a faculty chair or an administrator. For a full-time position, you're actually going to meet with a search committee, a larger panel of faculty, administrators, and your teaching demonstration would be expected to be longer, generally 15 to 60 minutes, and may involve you teaching in front of a live student audience. So that might be one of the distinctions between the full-time and the hiring for an adjunct position.
Great, thank you.
Can I just ask one follow-up too? I think this might vary depending on where you are in the country, so we're glad to have panelists from all over. Is it possible to get a full-time position if you have not adjunct initially?
Yes, absolutely. It is very possible to get a full-time position. As I alluded to earlier, if you have had graduate teaching assistant, some type of teaching experience and or good field or professional experience, yes, it's possible to get a full-time college teaching experience. In a community college, you may also get hired if you are a high school teacher who has experience with especially dual enrollment post-secondary educational levels with the appropriate academic credentialing.
Yeah, there was a question in the chat about teaching courses at more informal places like NIH, or I'm wondering even informal environments like a museum or an aquarium, if that kind of teaching experience also would be viewed as helpful.
It certainly would be very helpful. I would tell you that in a formal full-time search committee, we will be quantifying on our hiring matrices the number of either the credits or longevity of formal college teaching experience. That would be preferenced over other types of informal communication, presentations, those kinds of things. But certainly any experience you have in front of any type of an audience will enhance your ability to demonstrate your interpersonal and strong oral communication skills, which are so important during your interview as well as in your teaching demonstrations and certainly during your teaching career.
Great. So there's a question about full-time positions considered tenure track, and I wondered if you could speak a little bit about the tenure track versus non-tenure track positions.
Certainly. So every institution is going to do that a little differently. For example, at our community college, we do not have tenure per se. We have a 3-year probationary period, and then following that 3-year probationary period, essentially you would have tenure. In a community college, again, we are emphasizing the scholarship of teaching and learning. 90% of your activities as a faculty member would be teaching duties. And so we don't emphasize research as much at our institution, although some community colleges are conducting research. So your tenure or your performance evaluations would largely be based on your performance in your duties as a faculty member teaching in the classroom.
Great. Let's see.
Okay. Should we go on to the next?
Yeah, I think we should probably go on to the next question. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to ask this question to Kristen. So this is about the actual application process. So how does somebody apply to a job? Where are the jobs posted? Where would you find these jobs? If it's for an adjunct opportunity, should you be contacting chairs to see if there's opportunities out there? Kind of what does the timeline look like? And then what does the candidate need to submit with the application? And there were some in the chat, some questions about resume and cover letter, so I think that kind of falls in this category too. Kristen? Yep, you might have to push the talk button.
I had you on mute so you didn't hear my background noises. Sorry. I think the first thing to think about when you're applying is there a specific school or region that you want to be looking at? So if there's a specific school, that school is going to have their own website with their own job postings. Posting on their own website is free. It doesn't cost the school any money, so that's going to be the first place that every school is going to post their jobs. Of course, then there are other websites like communitycollegejobs.com or Higher Education Jobs or the Chronicle, that a lot of schools will post their jobs through those massive sites as well. So when you go onto those sites, you're going to see, many schools and many different kinds of positions and things like that. I would say look for all of those because you never know where you might find something. And if you see it on one of those sites, you can go to their actual website to learn more about it and things like that as well. In terms of I listed some other ones here. There's AAAS science jobs, job fairs, Glassdoor, and academic careers are ones that I didn't know as much about, but when I was getting ready for today, I saw those come up as additional sites. I really think, like I said before, going to the school that you're interested in is probably the first place to go. But if you are open to going anywhere, go to those other sites. The timeline is kind of tricky. I think first you post when there's a need, and typically there's a need because of someone retiring or leaving, and oftentimes that happens at the end of semesters, not necessarily in the middle. So, but the department knows ahead of time that someone's retiring or whatnot. So typically they're posted probably mid-semester, mid-fall, mid-spring to interview and hire for that following semester. So I would say start looking mid-October-ish for maybe a spring position, or mid-April-ish for looking for a fall position, or even maybe getting in on the summer. That's when people typically have announced and the school's ready to post their positions. Let's see, what else did I want to say? In terms of what you need to submit, it's always a really good idea to have, really well done cover letter. It's funny because as a person now who goes through all these for candidates, I can't tell you how many come that don't look very good, and it's interesting to me because I think we would expect so much more of our students, but then when we're applying for ourselves, we don't make it look so nice. So that makes a difference. It makes it nice that if yours looks like you put some attention into it. The cover letter specifically should demonstrate that why you want to teach, especially if you're leading research, why you want to be moving in that direction, and talking about your teaching experience and how that supports what you're doing. And a lot of people, when they're applying for full-time in particular, also submit a teaching philosophy. So kind of how they approach teaching, what style teaching they prefer, the focus in their classroom on, you know, how they are addressing at-risk students or academically unprepared students, things like that. That's always a really good idea. It shows that you put thought and energy into not just like, I don't know if I want to do this, but really that you are interested in the whole teaching thing. Was there one more thing? I felt like there was one more thing I forgot.
So, Kristen, if I can ask about the cover letter or the teaching statement. A lot of the people that are attending today's webinar, I think, are postdoctoral scholars or graduate students that may have done a lot of research. Is that something that, how should they be talking about their research in their cover letter versus the teaching experiences that they might have, which might be more limited? Is talking about their research a lot something that they should avoid doing? Is there a certain way to frame it? How can they find that balance between, you know, the value of the research that they've done when they're applying for a position that's teaching focused?
Absolutely. So most community colleges don't do any research, so that's not going to be their focus. However, we want people who are good thinkers and good scientists to be training our students. So by all means, brag on yourself and say what you've done. But I wouldn't put that be the main emphasis. Like, here is why I'm so awesome, and I want to teach. Like, you can't not have me, right? I'm the best fit for this. I also think that, you know, you're going up against other postdocs who've done research. So I think doing a little bit of background research on the department you're applying to can really be useful. In general, there are departments that have kind of maybe an interest. I know in my department it's shifting. It used to be a very kind of botany plant-heavy department, and over the years it's become a little bit more focused on molecular biology. But knowing the mix of people that might be sitting on your interview committee might really help. If your research fits into that area where a lot of people also did research, they're going to have interest in that, and you're just going to be a little bit more attractive in that way to them. So I don't say at all, don't put it in there, but don't make it your main emphasis, and try to relate it to what the department's focus might be.
Great. We had a question about how many applications you normally get.
Oh,
sorry, go ahead, Jess.
That's okay. Is that for me?
Yep.
Yeah? Okay. We get a lot. You get sometimes on the upper, I mean, we have HR kind of filtering through ours first. They get hundreds, and then maybe 50, 60 come to us, and then we have to sort through those ones. So I would say when a position's available, there's a lot of competition. So you got to make yourself stand out in some way. And for my community college, being student-centered, understanding diversity, being ready to tackle a student population that maybe isn't really ready to be in your class because they don't have the right reading level or the right math level, those are the kinds of skills that you need to present that you're capable and willing to handle.
I think that's a good lead into the next question, which is for Timothy. Can you describe what graduate students or postdocs can do now to help them prepare for a job at a community college? How can they be more competitive? What should they be thinking about before they apply? How can they prepare themselves?
Yes. One of the things you can do is if you're looking at if you have a community college around you, I would say contact department chairs and deans. See if they have any opportunities to be a teaching assistant. I know our community college, we have a teaching assistant program, and it's basically geared towards students who who are considering a community college teaching position, but they're in grad school. So this is something that you would get paired with a full-time faculty mentor, and it's usually a great way to get your foot in the door. In terms of just getting general teaching experience, I would say if you have any opportunities to do any graduate teaching assistantships, any tutoring, all of that's value added to your CV, your resume, when you're doing that. The other thing is you could look for any sort of courses that you could take. There are some, they're usually in the education part of the campus, but many schools have a community college teaching. Sometimes it's just a course, sometimes it leads to a certificate. I know there's online programs, but I would suggest looking on your own campuses and seeing if they have anything.
Great. I think someone in the chat also said something about mentoring undergrad students, and especially I think postdocs who can't be TAs in the classroom, but do a lot of teaching, maybe one-on-one or with multiple undergrads in the lab. Would that be considered good prep for having more experience?
I would say so. Anything that's getting you close to teaching is valuable. So I know, at least in California, I think the average application, we're usually looking for about a year of teaching. Sometimes it's specifically community college, sometimes it can be K through 12 or just regular higher education. But usually about a year is about what they're looking for, and some of them will consider tutoring as part of that.
Great.
I also just want to make a plug here, because part of one of the things that our Aspire work is trying to do is to set up some formal internships for graduate students interested in teaching at the community college. But in doing so, we've also found that a lot of them already exist, particularly in the Los Angeles region. For those that are joining from here, there are a lot of internship programs that you can find and have an experience shadowing or co-teaching at a community college. But also, overwhelmingly, it seems that the community college faculty, and our panelists can add to this, but are more than welcome to have people come and shadow their classes or set up some kind of informal shadowing experience, or have you come and do a guest lecture or something like that. So even if there isn't something formal that you're able to find, I think, as Timothy has said, if you reach out to people and see if there's a way that you can get some experience, that should be something that you're able to figure out how to do.
Kristen, did you want to add something?
I did. Can I add two things? One was I forgot to say that sometimes the postings are open for a really long time, and so you think, am I out of the running? Am I still in it? And I say, don't hesitate to reach out to a department chair and say, I submitted my application and I'm just wondering what status it is. Sometimes we wait till we get enough in the pool to really even start looking at them, so maybe we haven't even looked at you yet. Or maybe, I know when I personally applied for my full-time position, I put my application in and then didn't hear anything, and I thought, come on, I look good on paper. Like, you're not even going to give me an interview? I mean, you haven't even met me yet, but on paper I look really good. And it turned out that they had so many applicants that the ones that had applied when the position first opened, they figured those people already got jobs. And so they kind of just looked at the more recent ones and didn't really go back to all of the older ones. So I wanted to make that point that it's always worth reaching out, touching base, or even reapplying. If it's been open for 6 months and nothing's been said, go back in and reapply and get your application back in there again in the pool. The other thing I wanted to say was you were talking about having shadowing people and things like that. I think that's a fabulous way to reach out to those department chairs. So you can say, hey, I put my application in, really interested in your school, and I'd love to come and shadow because I'm new here or whatever, and that's going to get your foot in the door. You're going to know a faculty member, you're going to know a department chair, so that can be kind of your inroad. Put my application in, haven't heard, but I'd love to learn a little bit more about your department. So that's what I wanted to say.
Great.
So I think that's a great segue to this next question, which is for Carrie. So when you're on the search committee and you get all these applications, what are some of the common mistakes you see? Like, what is the process that the search committee is doing to evaluate candidates?
Sure. So as Kristen alluded to, for a full-time position, we may see, following HR screening for minimum qualifications, we may see 20 to 100 applicants for a particular position. Generally, our search committee would use a quantitative process. I encourage you, as you're preparing your application, cover letter, CV, materials, to really review and reflect on how your written materials address the required position and desired criteria for that particular position. You are going to want to tailor your materials to make it very easy for a search committee to find those qualifications that they are screening on a rubric. So just as you are grading a student's work, you want to easily be able to find those required areas and give students full points. Search committees are easily wanting the same. They are looking at the candidates and they are trying to give you full points on those required and minimum qualifications. So oftentimes it is a quantitative ranking based on points, and then the highest points are the ones that would be in your finalist pool, potentially invited for an interview. In terms of mistakes that we sometimes see, again, making sure you're addressing all the requirements in an application. One mistake might be too submitting an application when you don't meet the minimums. That will likely not even make it to the screening committee. Human Resources generally would screen you out as not meeting those minimums. So be sure you've done your research. It's fine to do a long shot application, but just recognize that's a lot of time that you're investing. The other thing that we would love to see is your passion for your discipline articulated in your cover letter and in your application materials, any essay questions that go along with that. We really want to hear that you love teaching and learning and that you're very dedicated to student success. Those are key things for you to think about. I would also encourage you to have someone assist you with proofreading to reduce errors. That is something that a search committee would pick up on right away. It shows your attention to detail, your thoroughness and thoughtfulness about the way in which you do your work. And so that's very important. And also make sure that you're completing the application completely. Sometimes we'll see candidates that will say CV, CCV, and we really want you to take in the time to thoroughly complete that employment application, even if you are adding information that is covered in your CV, such as timeframes of employment, your direct supervisors, those kinds of things. So I think that will help you put forth your very best application.
Thank you, Carrie. And there's a comment in the chat here from Leo about addressing the unique qualities of the community college students. And I'm thinking about another comment about having a diversity statement. Can you speak to that part of the application? Do you require a diversity statement, or is that something that you're looking for in the cover letter? How applicants are highlighting their ability to work with students from diverse backgrounds?
Yes, absolutely. That's a wonderful question, and it's so important to us at a community college. I wanted to point out on one of our last full-time search committees was looking for a math and engineering faculty position, and in addition to the, of course, the academic transcripts that denote the appropriate minimum master's degree and graduate credit hours in that specific discipline field, we are looking for applicants to demonstrate their ability to function in a team environment. That's where we would love to hear about when you were conducting research, you were part of a team, students, organizational, professional experiences that you've had in working with a team and coordination. And then again, that question that was asked, you demonstrated effectiveness working with populations, having diverse values, coming from varied cultures and backgrounds. We want you to articulate that you understand how diverse a community college student body would be, and that you are ready and eager and prepared to serve our students.
And I'll make another plug here if you'd like a little bit more specific information about the diverse environment at the community colleges and inclusive teaching around that, to join our next webinar, which is on April 11th, which will focus on that. So that might also give you some ideas for your cover letter as well. So thank you, Carrie. I will turn it over to Rachel for the next question.
Okay, so the next question's for Kristen. We're wondering if you could speak to the interview process and share some common questions that you or your committee might ask a candidate, and what you're looking for in responses from candidates.
Okay. So one of the things that we've been doing here, and I think this is becoming more of a national push, is to look at current student success data to better get a good picture on how we can help students that are struggling do better, right? I mean, that's the goal, but now we're starting to really look at data to see that, and then implementing new strategies every semester to try to move that needle and see if we can get some of those D students to C's and C students to D's. So one of the things that we've been more recently doing is providing the interviewee with some of our data and saying, what would you do if you were posed with these problems? That, so for example, some of our data shows that our African American male population doesn't do as well as the other demographic categories that we have broken it down into. So what can we do to better meet those students wherever they are so that they are more successful? So be prepared for a data-based question. I'm thinking more and more schools are going in that direction, and they want people who are going to come on board with good ideas with that regard. Part of your interview is likely going to be teaching, so incorporate teaching strategies that are up-and-coming teaching strategies that less and less people want to see people just standing up in front of the classroom and lecturing. Instead, they want it to be an active classroom where you're engaging students, you're interacting with the students, you're making the students do the learning instead of you doing the talking. The best teaching demos that we've had is that the person treats the interview committee like students. I mean, we've had handouts, we've had questions being asked of the group to participate. I think those are really fabulous ways to show that you're different than just an average person who wants to stand up in front of the room and lecture. Some of the questions that we ask, describe your teaching philosophy. It's one thing to be able to regurgitate on a piece of paper maybe current practices that you've read about, but to be able to speak about them and answer questions on them is, it shows that you really believe what you're saying and you really feel that that's a good strategy for learning. Another really great question that we've asked and felt that we got a lot of information from our candidates from is describing to us an excellent professor or teacher you've had and why they were so effective towards you. So that's something that if you're just caught off guard, you're like, I have a million teachers that have impacted me. So it's something, if you know kind of ahead of time, that might be a question to think about it. And in that thought process, you are preparing yourself for a variety of questions kind of around that same topic of what strategies worked for you and why did they work for you, and so that's why they were effective. We also, because we have a really diverse student population, ask questions regarding diverse academic preparation in terms of the students. So for example, we might have a classroom that has a couple students that took AP biology sitting next to a 70-year-old woman who has never really taken a biology course. sitting next to people who took ninth grade biology but, you know, got a D. And so they have just this wide range of different backgrounds sitting in the first row of your class on the first day. So how do you engage all of those different people in that same classroom at the same time and get them kind of where you need them to be? So thinking about that diverse classroom in terms of, you know, demographic and economic diversity, but also in terms of preparedness, because that's a really big challenge for a lot of teachers. And another question that we found to be kind of useful is, it's not a high school classroom in a community college, but you do have a lot of younger people. You have students that maybe have various different needs, and so we ask a lot of questions like, how do you deal with, how would you deal with having a blind student in a laboratory? What would you do to help that student really do well? We have had students that are blind, and you have to be able to deal with those situations. Or how would you just deal with a really disruptive student that the other students are all complaining about? What are you going to do in those situations? So kind of dealing with behavior. You don't have that as much as a community college, don't get scared. It's not like a high school classroom. But it is something that we want whoever we're bringing on to be aware of and careful in terms of how they deal with it.
So it sounds like even if they haven't had specific experience dealing with these different situations, they're able to speak to how they might. And it sounds like, one of the questions I had was, are you expecting a response where there is specific knowledge about the research on how people learn, especially if they haven't had as much teaching experience? You know, do you want to hear that they understand what the research shows?
I would say, you know, that is definitely something you want to be up to par on. You want to be aware of the current practices and what the kind of the hot teaching things are for right now. And, you know, right now it's more of that engaged classroom, less lecture. It's meeting the students where they are, being student ready, keeping your expectations and your rigor where you want them, but somehow figuring out how to get your students to rise to those. Yes, I would say do some background research on good best practices, current best practices.
Great, thank you.
Should we go to the next one?
Yeah, I think we can go to the next question.
Okay, this one's for Timothy. This is about the teaching demo. Does your college require a teaching demo? I know it does, for both adjunct and full-time. And then how should the candidates be preparing for these? What are some common mistakes you might see coming up in the teaching demos? I will turn it over to you.
Okay, the teaching demo is probably one of the more misunderstood aspects of the interview. And a lot of times applicants don't understand that we actually want to see them teach, not stand up there and treat us as wallpaper, not stand up there and simply talk about teaching. So if you're wondering what kind of teaching demo you need to sort of prepare for, I would say you definitely need to call HR. It never hurts to ask. Some committees will role play as students, and when you do that, it can be a very interactive type of experience. So I know that on our campus, we would basically give you just the broad range of students that you would find in your average community college course, and we wanted to see how would you handle those types of students, how would you handle confusion in there. The other thing is, when you are given a very specific amount of time, let's say 15 minutes to do a teaching demo, you need to practice. So they usually give you a subject or some topic they want you to speak on. Sometimes it's really specific, sometimes you have a choice, but you really need to take the time and time yourself and make sure that you are not going over and not too far under. So usually if it were 15 minutes, I would say try to get it down to maybe 12 to 13 would be kind of a sweet spot. That way, if you're really nervous on the day of the interview and you rush through it too fast, hopefully it isn't too short, And if you get nervous and you're too slow, hopefully it doesn't go overboard. But I think that's probably the second biggest mistake is a lot of applicants just walk in there and they think they can wing it because they have some teaching experience. 10 minutes should be nothing. And it's usually disastrous. And so what I would say is when you get to that interview, you should really be thinking that you are one step away from getting a full-time position. And if the starting salary is $64,000, then think of it that way. How much time should you put in to prepare for an interview, prepare for a teaching demonstration, if you're one step away from nailing that full-time job with full benefits? And other than that, I would say if you are a little bit worried when on the day of the interview and right before your teaching demo and you just have a quick question you want to ask, I would say ask it. It never hurts to ask. What the worst thing that's going to happen is they will say, we can't answer that.
And Timothy, are you looking for more kind of active learning, or are you looking for somebody who's a charismatic lecturer? What are you looking for in the way that they're doing the teaching demo? Should there be a lot of interaction, or?
Yeah, we really want to see how are they going to engage the person. So usually your teaching demonstration is geared towards that. How are you engaging students? So it wouldn't be something where we would be expecting someone to write information on the board and then tell the students to be copying down and taking notes. So it usually is going to be interactive. So even if the committee doesn't interact, we still want to see someone who is interacting. Things like handouts and other things are fine, but really we want to see them up there engaged, and you need to understand that it's going to be a long day of these individuals serving on these hiring committees. And if you are the first interview of the day and they're fresh, that's great. But if you are the last interview of the day, you need to understand that you need to kind of wake them up. You need to not make them fall asleep or get bored. This is, like I said, you really need to walk into this situation with the understanding that you are one interview away after this from getting a full-time job.
You might have said, do you have teaching demos for adjunct or part-time, or mostly for full-time?
Typically for your adjunct positions, it's more of just an informal interview. So they'll usually sit down and either talk to the dean or the chair, but not a teaching demonstration, at least on our campus. Okay. Teaching demos are for the full-time positions.
Okay. I think it was Carrie that said that they do have, for their adjuncts, they do have teaching demos. Is that right, Carrie?
Yes, I just wanted to add that you should also consider, if you're applying for a position at an out-of-state institution, that there will be sometimes community colleges that will conduct first round or even final interviews via Skype video. So because many community colleges are not in a position where they can afford to bring in out-of-state candidates. So be prepared and think about your technology and the way that you would deliver a teaching demonstration if we were having an online interview with your search committee.
And I would just add, I completely agree with that. If you are being interviewed via Skype, you really need to practice that because sitting in front of a webcam you're really removed from the people in the room. And I think the Skype interviews tend to be a lot more difficult than the in-person ones.
Okay, thank you so much. Right now, we have planned a couple of extra questions, but I think that there were still a lot of questions that came up in the chat that we could move to. So what I want to do right now is I just want to take 2 minutes. If you have a question that hasn't been addressed, if you could type that into the chat. If the moderators, Rachel is the other moderator, and the panelists, if you could scroll through the chat and look at some of the questions that have come up in the past. I'm going to just take some notes here, and then we can try to get through some of the questions that haven't been answered yet. And Shannon, is there a way for me to make a little whiteboard so I can just make it visible to everybody some of the questions if I just type a couple notes? it this thing? No. Oh no, that's not it.
Sure. Well, I'm not sure who started that, but I can. You can either just write on this page, or I can add a new whiteboard page. Just 1 second.
I think a new whiteboard page would be great.
Okay, there's a new blank page.
Okay, I'll just take 1 more minute to see here. Master's versus PhD. Oh, sorry. My colleague just let me know you can't hear me. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. If you want to add a couple more questions in the chat, that's great, but we can try to address as many of these in the time remaining. Before we do that, I just want to address the question that came up about the diversity of the panelists and the community college faculty in general. I want to acknowledge that comment and note that I think we can work to do better and overall in all of our webinars and panelists to have more attention to diversity of panelists. I do want to thank the community college faculty who are on our panel today. The process for this was that we sent out emails recruiting and requesting people to volunteer, and we're so thankful that these three from each of our regional collaboratives in California, Iowa, and Texas volunteered their time. So I want to thank them for that. If you have any more specific feedback, I'll go ahead and put my email in the chat, and you can send me a private email about that, and we can work to address that in upcoming events, or if we do this series again next year. And in terms of the diversity at the community colleges and faculty overall, I wanted to maybe just turn that over to our panel. Timothy, I don't know if that's something that you'd be able to speak to about at Cerritos College, which is in Southern California, the diversity of the faculty in our region. Can you hear me?
In terms of just, are we talking just overall diversity amongst faculty, or are we talking just STEM?
I think that the question might be about, is working at a community college, is that a diverse, inclusive environment for faculty overall?
I would say absolutely. I'm on the EEO committee on our campus, and we spend a lot of time putting forward policies, procedures to improve our diversity on our campus. And I think if you were to look at where we were in 1997 when I was hired, and then where we are currently right now, you see a huge difference when it comes to that. So I would say diversity is embraced at the community college level.
We can hear you, Jess.
Sorry about that. I put my email in the chat if people want to send me any more specific comments. And the topic of our next webinar on inclusive teaching and understanding the environment of the community colleges also will dig into diversity and the community college setting a little bit more specifically as well. But I know we have a bunch of questions up here on this whiteboard panel that I want to make sure we get to as many of them as we can. So we didn't really talk about salary, negotiating salary when you get an offer, how to handle that. So maybe I'll just open it up to any of the panelists who would like to talk about that one first.
I'll speak up first. So I think salary really differs from school to school. I mean, I live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and there's several community colleges here, and even among the ones that are in this local region, their salaries are varied. So I think you just need to specifically look at the public domain kind of thing that you can just look up to see what that is. In terms of negotiations here, there is not a negotiation. You are hired at a specific level based on your degree and how many years of teaching experience you have. And for example, teaching adjunct only counts as a half a year towards your total, not a full year. So just keep that in mind when you're adding. It might be different when they're adding in terms of what your salary might be.
I agree with Kristen. Our salaries are part of an established hiring matrix that would be on our human resources department that is based on your years of teaching service and your level of degree. There are ways in which faculty can continue to take additional graduate courses to move across that matrix to improve their overall salary, but the salary that's given would not be negotiated. And so I do encourage applicants to take a look on human resources to explore benefit packages as well as salary structures and making decisions about an institution that would be a good fit.
I would agree with both panelists too. Our salary is set by our college and our union contract. So it takes into account where your education level is, as well as your how many years of teaching experience you have. But yeah, there's no negotiation in that.
Jess, we can't hear you again, I think.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Sorry. Okay, so how about the master's versus PhD preparation for your CV? So there's a question, do master's candidates have a chance? Timothy, do master's candidates have a chance?
Yes, master's candidates definitely do have a chance of getting a full-time job. I'm one of them. In fact, I would say probably the majority of hires, at least on our campus, are with master's degrees. Some come in with doctorates, some earn their doctorates while they're teaching, but I think still the majority is still master's degrees, because that is the minimum qualifications for getting a full-time position in our state.
Can I add to that? I would say at my school. Yeah. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Can you hear me? Okay. I would say that's true for my school as a whole. Probably most people that get hired are people that have a master's. But I would say in the sciences, it's because it's so competitive and people with PhDs are now looking for teaching careers, majority of our faculty have PhDs in the sciences. So not just biology, and all of them, physics, all that kind of stuff. And I will tell you, if you have experience teaching physics or microbiology, at least where we are, come apply right now, because we always need people in those fields that we can just never keep those positions filled. People that are in those fields tend to go on to other things, and so we lose them very quickly.
Okay, I'm trying to pick which question here for next. There's two questions about the references. So how do you choose references between teaching mentors versus research mentors? What's important about the reference letter or the references themselves? Carrie, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. So we are going to look at someone who has supervised your teaching most recently. That is probably going to be our first priority, was looking at your reference is going to be, you may put down a colleague reference or someone, but we are going to actually call your former employer who supervised your teaching to see what we can learn about your success in the classroom in working and supporting a diverse group of students.
Okay. So there's a question, what are class hierarchies typically like compared to the 4-year? Is there typically a multi-class structure, like Gen Chemistry 1 and 2, Organic 1 and 2, Bio 1 and 2? Are they more overview type courses? Oh, okay, this is a question I don't think we've talked about, which is like, how does the curriculum structure differ, and what are, yeah, I guess to add on to what Carrie just said, like what are some of the classes where, oh, sorry, I think that was Kristen. What are some of the classes where you're most looking to recruit people that you have the hardest time filling? What are the general core structures that you have?
I think this is such a fantastic question for a number of reasons. First, I do think it's important for candidates to realize that you will be teaching first and second year students. So that should be translated in your materials, that you understand that, and certainly your teaching demos should be calibrated towards those first and second year students that you're serving. And generally, our community colleges are designed for transfer, particularly in our liberal arts programming areas and STEM sequences. So we will be closely aligned with our most predominant transfer partners, and teaching as that question is structured, the same types of first and second level science courses that would be in a neighboring four-year college university.
And is there, when you're looking to hire, are there classes that are taught the most, that you often have the most sections and that you need a lot of adjuncts to help teach those classes? Like if you're thinking about somebody getting their foot in the door, are there certain classes in the sciences that they could reach out to a chair and most express interest in teaching those courses? Carrie?
Did you guys hear? Sure, I'll jump in again. As Kristen said, there are certain courses that all of us are looking for specialists. So microbiology, physics, mathematics, chemistry is one in our local area that we really are always looking for adjunct faculty. So it's a great place to get your foot in the door. Some of those technical specialist areas. In full-time faculty, we're trying to hire full-time specialists where there are smaller adjunct pools of faculty available. So we have 2 engineering faculty, for example, that in addition to engineering might also be qualified to teach mathematics. So it's a variety of STEM fields that we would be looking to fill, and some of those first and second year courses that have the largest populations might also be in the general education required courses for health science majors. So again, that's why microbiology is so important, anatomy and physiology, Gen Chem 1 and 2, Biology 1 and 2. So you would be teaching those large breath survey courses for first and second year students.
Can I add something?
Please.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
So I would also say be very open-minded. So oftentimes our needs are in those big courses. So there's these niche courses like micro where we need people, but we also have a huge number of sections in our non-majors, biology 1 and 2, and in our A&P courses. So I would say to make yourself even more marketable, say, you know, here's my background, and that means I can teach non-majors or majors in addition to A&P or micro, right? So the more that you put on the table that you're willing to teach, that makes you way better as a candidate to pull into this team, because we can put you wherever our needs are. So make that very clear that you're willing to teach not just some boutique course, but you want to teach, you know, the regular courses as well.
So Timothy, I remember speaking to you about this at one point, because I think in California it's very structured, but when and how do faculty search committees decide the questions? So for an interview, are there, you know, is it very prescribed and identified in advance? Can they add questions on the fly? What is that process like for developing the process that the candidates are going to go through?
You mean just for determining interview questions?
Yeah, but in general, I know that there's a very specific structure in place for California. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Usually the hiring committee will meet in advance and they work out a calendar, and then they start working on what they want to say in a job announcement. What are the required qualifications, and then what are some of the preferred qualifications. When it comes to questions for interviews, they usually determine those well in advance of the interview. Generally speaking, maybe 10 or so of them. When the interview actually occurs, you can't, at least on our campus at least, you cannot add questions. You can ask questions that clarify, that ask for clarification for something a candidate said, but you can't just create your own question on the spot. So they are pretty set in stone, and every candidate gets asked the exact same questions throughout the whole process. At the second level interview, and that's usually when you're meeting with the president, the vice president, dean, and probably the chair of the committee, That one is a little more open. They, at least the ones that I've seen, they definitely have a set amount of questions, but they can go off of those, and they can ask new ones depending on where the interview is headed. So that one's a little more open.
Carrie or Kristen, do you want to add anything about the structure of your interviews or any kind of these roles behind the scenes that the candidates might not know about in terms of what you're allowed to do or not allowed to do when interviewing?
I agree with Timothy that we set them ahead of time, and that's just the questions you're allowed to ask, and not to add anything but except for clarification. I mean, the things that we talk about are making sure you don't ask personal questions, and to keep it very professional. So we remind our committees have to go through a training process to ensure that they're not being biased and asking inappropriate questions. So we do go through a training process in order to serve on these committees.
I would just add another important consideration during our process is that you're going to interact with lots of administrative support staff as well as human resources. And oftentimes the way in which you respond to inquiries or requests for additional information or setting up your interview times and those kinds of things, the search committees will check in to see what your response times were, if they enjoyed visiting with you on the phone, those kinds of things. So keep in mind that your interview starts from the time you're contacted to schedule your interview.
Thanks, Carrie. That's a great point to highlight. Somebody is putting in these little pointers with some questions we didn't get to yet. Thank you, whoever's doing that. Is that you, Rachel?
I did one of them.
Okay.
Someone did.
I don't even know how to do that, so that's great. Okay, let's start with the top one. Do community colleges sponsor international applicants to get work visas? Is anybody able to speak to that?
I can, and I can say that no, it's not something that we, the HR has suggested we try to do. So they discourage us, in other words, from doing that because it's if they can get their own visa for whatever else, we can interview them and stuff, but we don't go and get that for them.
We have sponsored a visa previously for a candidate in a very hard to fill position, and we would do it if there was not another qualified applicant for that position, but because of the extended costs and processing, we really try to find candidates that are already in possession of their work permits.
Yeah, I don't know how common it is. I know a faculty at Santa Monica College who was sponsored to work there, but it definitely is complicated, and again, I don't know how common it is.
Okay, so it sounds like maybe if there is somebody who's trying to get sponsored on the call here, that expanding your reach of where you might apply to find a job that would be more competitive might increase your chances of that happening. It sounds like it would have to be in a position that's really hard to fill, which could be the subject matter or it could be the location possibly as well. Why do you hire adjunct instead of full-time? I'm not exactly sure what question that's asking. Maybe somebody could speak to cases when you would need to hire an adjunct right away versus another question might be the balance of adjunct to full-time faculty at a given institution or within a department. Who would like to?
I can speak to this one. So we hire full-time when the budget allows it. So that's something that has to be budgeted in. So for us, you have to really justify why you need a new position if it's a new position, or you have to wait for someone to leave, retire, leave for some other job or something. And then that position is open for filling. So budget really requires whether or not we hire full-time or not. In terms of when we hire adjuncts, if our classes are filling and we have space to offer more sections, then we are going to be on the look for adjuncts to fill those sections. So for us, looking for adjuncts is a continual process. It never really ends because we constantly have, we'll have people kind of teaching to get experience between college and medical school, or getting their master's and going to medical school or something like that. And so a lot of our adjuncts kind of come and go and don't necessarily stay with us forever, or they get full-time positions somewhere. So with regards to the adjunct hiring, that's a continual process because we always need people to fill, especially those high enrollment courses like non-majors biology.
Mm-hmm.
And I see one new question that just popped in. Is the hiring process, I guess, different depending on the discipline? Or at the community college in general, is the process kind of the same regardless of discipline?
I can't really speak to that.
How about
generally, the processes would be very similar. Certainly, the requirements and perhaps the teaching demonstration topics and specific questions would be tailored to the needs of that particular position. We should also emphasize in our community colleges, I know at our community college we have multiple campuses, and so some of our campuses have various local needs or nuances about the students that they serve, and so those positions would be uniquely tailored.
Okay. Well, I wanted to save a little bit of time. We have about 10 minutes left here. I wanted to give each of the panelists, first I wanted to thank you so much for volunteering your time today to speak to your experience serving on hiring panels and give everyone a behind-the-scenes look of how all of that goes down. I wanted to give everyone a chance to give some departing words of advice to the participants on the call here. So assuming that people are interested and that they're starting to apply for jobs at community colleges or will be perhaps in the next year or so, maybe you can just share your advice that you would give to people as they're starting to get their foot in the door and wanting to make themselves competitive applicants. So I'll give you 1 minute to think about it. And then maybe we can start with Timothy, and then Kristen, and then Carrie. So Timothy, whenever you're ready.
Okay. What I would probably say is, one, definitely start if you are seriously considering a job at the community college. Pick it up in an adjunct position while you're maybe still in grad school, even if it's just one class would be great. It shows an interest in teaching at that level, and it adds to your experience. The other thing I would say is, if it's possible, if you don't have life circumstances that tie you to one particular area, you really need to go where the jobs are. So apply widely. Don't try to just apply to only a few of them. You really need to look at every single opportunity that's out there. And I think that's probably one of the things that I see hurts many adjuncts is they only apply to a select few. And that just is really not taking advantage of all of the job opportunities out there.
So is my turn?
Yes.
Okay. I would say don't give up. First of all, there's lots of, especially adjunct positions constantly being open, so just keep getting your name out there, keep getting applications in, and as much as you can, go talk to department chairs, go talk to deans, find out what their needs are so that you can tailor your application, your CV, your letter of recommendations, and your cover letter to their needs, and that's going to make you more marketable. And then I would say the other really probably most important thing for me as a person who's hiring people is keep in mind that community colleges are student-centered. That's their goal, is to get students in the college experience and to get a degree. And so, again, tailor your application to that understanding that students come first.
Thank you, Kristen. How about you, Carrie?
Well, it's always hard to go last. I agree with Tim and Kristen's words of wisdom, I would just encourage you, as Kristen said, to build some relationships with folks while you're in graduate school. We are so happy to have either informal mentored experiences with graduate students here with our faculty, or come down and meet with a dean or hiring manager for an area while you're still in your graduate program. We can help advise you if there's particular areas of teaching. We can review your academic transcripts, maybe make some recommendations on some additional courses or experiences that you could get that would strengthen your application. And as Tim said, please consider teaching just even one class. And at our community colleges, we have face-to-face courses, we have hybrid courses, as well as online courses. So sometimes that is something that can get your foot in the door, get you that great experience, but also be flexible around your teaching, research, and other scholarly pursuits that you have while you're in graduate school. So thank you so much for considering working at a community college. We would be so pleased, particularly in our STEM fields, to see a surge in our applicants.
Thank you so much. And yes, I was going to ask to bring up the slides just so I could go back to the last one. Or yes, this is good here. Oh, sorry. I just wanted to go to the slide that has the upcoming events. There we go. So thank you so much again to our panelists for volunteering your time to share with our participants. Again, I wanted to point out that there's a couple of other webinars coming up on April 11th, Understanding Diversity and Inclusive Teaching in the Community College Setting. And then there's one on April 17th about teaching as research presentations, and on April 22nd, faculty advising in the community college setting. All of these I think would be great ones to attend, and we hope to see you there. So thank you everybody for spending this last hour and a half with us. I guess I will stick around for another minute or two if there's any other questions in the chat. But otherwise I will say thank you to our panelists, and you're free to sign off everybody, and thank you for joining today.
Thank you.
As you're leaving, if you have a few minutes to complete a survey, we'd like to get some feedback on this event that we can incorporate into future events. So there's the link on the slide there, and I'll post it in the chat again too. Thanks everyone. Thanks so much.
Sorry, Shannon, I forgot about the survey. Yes, please take a minute to give feedback on the survey. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thanks. Sorry for the construction going on in the background of me right now, but thanks so much to Jess and Rachel for facilitating, and to all of our speakers. They're always very informative sessions, and we had a lot of good participation again today, especially in the chat, and really good attendance again.